Now, in this video, I'm going to be covering a topic that I get a lot of questions about: automation using recall scope. A lot of people that I talk to are very intimidated by the automation on the console. So if they've never done it before, they're a little reluctant to try to use it during their show. So once I have shown people how to do it, they see just how simple and intuitive it is. And within a few minutes, they feel comfortable and you're able to harness the power of what this console can actually do. Here we are in the automation window. And again, I want to reiterate that we are going to be covering just the recall scope only. Store scope is more of an advanced type of automation that, unless you have a really good understanding of the automation process, you can find yourself getting into trouble if you're using the store scope. Store scope would typically be used in like theater type of operations. But for rock and roll and regular kind of music, the recall scope is going to be more than what we need to do what we have to do. So let's jump in now. Currently, I have the song Now We Die selected, and I'm just going to go ahead and find an empty scene and just save it again so we could work on it for this demonstration. So here I'm going to hit Store. I'm going to click to Store to Empty Scene, and I'm going to type in the name Now We Die 2. So now let's quickly navigate to the different sections of the automation window. We see here that we have the ability to edit, copy, paste, and delete. If we click on Store Scene, we'll be able to store a scene just like we do when we hit the Store button on the console surface. We have the ability to add as well as edit crossfades. We have the ability to add GPIO, internal, and MIDI type of events. We're going to be going through all of those shortly. But for now, let's click on the recall scope and look at the screen here. In the recall scope screen, you're going to see in the window here that I have a lot of items in the mixer selected in green. For many of you who are familiar with using the automation system on other types of consoles, you might think that this looks really familiar. For those other consoles, when you had certain elements selected, those were the items that were going to be recalled upon entry of the scene. Here on the Midas Pro Series consoles, it's the opposite. I know you might think that this is going to take you a long time to get used to, but trust me, it won't take you long to be familiar with it. Here on the left side, we have all of our channels, and on the right side, we have all of our matrices, aux ends, and our aux returns. Here on the top, we can select the Effects Groups tab, and then it's going to bring up all of our graphic EQs, assignable effects, our mute groups, pop groups, and our VCAs. Let's take a look at each section of the parameters for the automation. Here on the top, we have our routing. This, of course, is going to control all of the patching. You can have recall automation to actually change the patching of any of the channels. Next is the down arrow. This is going to cover everything below that point. Next, we have the selection for the mic amp. So this will control our gain levels, both for the analog and the gain trim. Here we have the tab for the EQ. Below that, we have the tab for our dynamics, for the compressor and the gates. And here we have the selection for our buses. Let me go ahead and click on this to show you something. Here we have a selection for all 72 aux ends as well as the 24 matrices. We also have the ability to just go ahead and select all. Next is for the mute status. And finally, we have our fader. Now let's click on the Effects Groups tab. Here you see that I have all the graphic EQs selected and they're highlighted green. What this means is if I make a change to my graphic EQ for the main PA, and now I go into the next song, the EQ is going to follow over and it's not going to be changed. Below that, with my assignable effects, you see on my rack on the right-hand side, they're all illuminated so that way those rack items always stay in place. For the items on the left-hand side, these are the effects that are going to be changing each time I select automation. You're probably asking yourself, why do I have my automation set up this way? Well, let's take it back to my soundcheck file. So I'm just going to scroll back to my soundcheck file, which is where I'm going to start each day. Now that I have the soundcheck file selected, you see that all of the recall automation has gone away. The reason for this is if I make any changes to my show file during the soundcheck that might have been different than last night's show, the way I have my automation set up is as I go into each specific scene, I don't want it to recall information. This is a personal preference of mine, and the reason for that, with a lot of the bands that I mix, they're not consistent from day in and day out. Not that this is a bad thing or anything that I'm talking bad about the bands, but this is just how I prefer how to mix my shows. It allows me to retain all of my settings throughout the show, so if I'm making individual tweaks here and there, it's going to keep carrying over. You, however, might be working on a show that needs to be recalled exactly the same day in and day out. So for you, I would suggest that you leave all of this stuff unselected and work the automation that's going to best fit you. So I'm going to scroll through to show you just how the recall scope is working for my automation. So right now, in this show file, if I were to recall or refresh this scene, all of the settings that are in the file are going to be recalled. As I hit next, I'm going to go into my walk-in scene, which you'll notice again that no recall information has been selected. But then, once I select into the first song of the show, you will notice that the recall information is applied to the show files. So let's go ahead and do that. So as I'm pressing next, we have my walk-in. Here you'll see that the layout of the console has changed, but none of the recall information has been applied. Now, let's go into the first song of my show. Here, we're in Clenching the Fist of Dissent. If you notice, some of these channels have information that's going to be recalled, and this is basic information. Like on my tracks, these are for my intros and my outros. Some of the files have a little bit of EQ changes here and there to clean things up. Here on the two bass channels, you'll see that the EQs are also unselected. That's because I'm allowing the high-pass filter to change from song to song to song. You'll also notice in buses that I don't have anything selected. That way, this allows me to change all of my aux sends for my effects to change from song to song to song. For me, the way I like to use the automation, it still allows me as the mixer to mix my show. So the way I'm using the automation is that it helps me in my workflow so I can keep focusing in on the mixes. My automation recall is really just changing the layout of the console as well as all my effects and my tap tempo. So now that I've scrolled through all the songs for the set list, once I reach the last song in the show, I will scroll back up to my soundcheck file. I will click on the recall scope screen. I will then select none, which is going to unselect all of the automation. Let me just click on effects to show you that it's all cleared. Now I'm going to hit store and overwrite. The reason for this is any of the settings that I've changed during the show, I can now save that to be my starting point for the next day. Let's go ahead and head back to automation and save it. Okay, let's go back into the scene. Let's head back to Now We Die. On this scene, you'll see that I actually have a MIDI event happening. You'll notice that it's happening on my scene entry, my exit, and recall. It's going to send MIDI on a program change. That's because I have my Sans amp in my rack in front of house. That's because in this song, I have a section with the distorted vocal. This will allow me to recall the preset that I have dialed in specifically for this song. I also use this hardware piece for several other songs for the same type of effect. However, I've made specific settings on my Sans amp for each of those songs. So anytime I enter a scene that's going to be using the Sans amp, the preset for that song has been recalled and it's ready to go. To create a MIDI event is very easy. There's a couple ways we could do that. We can go ahead and select on a specific scene and hit Add MIDI, or we can go in and hit the Edit button. So to do that, let me select a different song. Let's go ahead and select This Is the End. Now that we're in the scene, I can go ahead and hit Add MIDI. Now you'll see that we have a MIDI event listed here under This Is the End. We can go ahead and click on this and then hit the Edit button. This pulls up the MIDI event window. We have the ability to put a name in here. I personally like to put what the MIDI event is actually going to be affecting. So as we see here on the Now We Die, I have it listed as Sans amp and that it's recalling preset 69. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and call this Sans amp. And we'll put in 75. That way, it's going to recall preset number 75. Here, we have the ability to have it either on an incoming or an outgoing MIDI type of signal. I'm going to leave it for outgoing because I want the console to trigger the outboard effect. Next, we have the ability of when and how the MIDI event is actually triggered. We can change it. We can have it on scene entry, scene exit, scene recall, entry and recall, entry and exit, or we can have it on the entry, the exit, and the recall. Personally, I just like to have it here, so this way, if I need to refresh the scene for any reason, it's going to recall, or if I go back into the scene. Next, we have the ability to have a time offset. This is great if you're running a show that's actually on a time code and everything is exactly in time and you want it to trigger at a specific moment. If we do have a time offset, we then have the ability to say what happens once the time is reached. If we hit the drop down, we see it can transmit MIDI data, we can transmit GPIO data, or we could actually have it trigger automation events, or we can bring up notes on the screen or have a crossfade event. Here we have the event parameters for the MIDI event. As you'll see, I have it selected right now for IO ID1. That's because I'm actually triggering the MIDI off of my first IO, which is my 451 here at front of house. The 451 has MIDI in, out, and through on it. If we scroll down, we also see that we have the ability to trigger MIDI from the front of house port. Next, we can select the channel that the MIDI is going to be transmitted on. If you're going to be doing any kind of MIDI events, I suggest you have a basic understanding of how MIDI works. This is going to make your life a lot easier when setting up your MIDI. I have my SansAmp set up to receive and transmit MIDI data on channel 1. So I'm going to go ahead and leave channel 1 selected. Next, we have the program options for the MIDI event. Here, we have the ability to do node on, node off, aftertouch, pressure, control change, and program change. I'm going to use program change because I want it to recall a preset on the SansAmp. So we're going to leave that on program change. Now I have the ability to select the program change. You'll see that this will go all the way up to 128 channels. Again, for those of you who are familiar with MIDI, you'll understand why it goes to 128. So let's go ahead and select Program Change 75. So now we have the ability to test the event before we actually assign it to the scene. So if we look over on the SansAmp, we see that it's currently set to 69. So now I'm going to go ahead and click Test Event, and we should see this change to 75. And there we have it. So now we know that the MIDI event is set up correctly. We can go ahead now and close out. Another type of event that we can add is an internal type of event. So let's go ahead and click on that. Let's select it and hit Edit. An internal event is almost the same as a MIDI event. And actually, you could do a MIDI event by using an internal event. And as you'll see, we have the ability to have the event either on the incoming or the outgoing of the scene. Again, we have the drop down here of when and how we want the entry to happen. We have our time offset, which can then trigger the type of event. And as you see, we have a MIDI transmit, as well as all of the other events. However, you notice down here, we have a notes event. This is a great feature to have because if we have any notes that we need to remind ourselves about anything that we might need to do within the scene or when we're leaving the scene, the pop-up is going to appear on the screen to let us know. Okay, let's go ahead and close this out for now. Since I don't need this type of event, I can go ahead and select it and then right-click, and then we can select Delete. We'll see that we have the pop-up here to delete this event. Great. Let's go ahead and save. Adding a GPIO event is the same steps that you would take when doing a MIDI or an internal type of event, so I'm not going to cover that. Now, we have the ability to add crossfades, so let's click on that. Okay, let's select on the crossfade and then hit Edit. Once again, at the top, you see that we have the same options when creating the other types of scenes, so I'm not going to discuss this. So down here on the bottom, you see that we have additional parameters that we can edit in this type of event. Let's look at the different parameters that are available for crossfade events. Here we have fader, pan, image front to back, front divergence, rear divergence, front and rear divergence, center, subs, and mutes. Now below that, we have the ability to add the time and the distance of travel. As you see, these are very powerful automation tools that we have available to us. So if you really dig down deep, you can create some amazing type of automation parameters. Let's go ahead and close out of this and delete that event. Okay, we're going to go over a few other things here in the automation window. First thing is going to be the Reorder Scenes button. This is going to give me the ability to move the different scenes around. So let's go ahead and do that. If we notice down in the right-hand corner, we have the Reorder Scenes button. Let's click that, but keep your eye on over here. You're going to notice how there's a change here. As you see, the boxes have changed and some of the boxes have gone away. Now we have the ability to reorder the scenes. So what I like to do is I have my sound checks here at the beginning, as well as my walk-in, and now I go through and I start selecting the different songs in the order that they're going to appear. My guys always like to change the set around, which keeps things exciting for me. As you see, as we're clicking on them in different orders, that the numbers are following suit. So once we went ahead and selected all of the songs, we can now hit reorder. We're going to get a pop-up to let us know that it's going to reorder all the scenes. We're going to hit OK, and you'll notice that all of the scenes have reordered themselves. Next, I want to go over the rehearsal button. I get asked this question a lot. Since I just reordered all the songs for the set list, if I found out in the middle of the show that we were going to skip a song, I can go ahead and click on rehearsal. This now is going to give me the ability to go ahead and click on any one of the songs within the set that we might be skipping. So let's say we're going to skip Imperium for tonight. So at this point, I'm going to click Edit. And if I go in here, I can select the skip button. I can close out. You'll see that I have a skip button over here. So now, let me go back to where we were with Now We Die. I'm going to stay in the rehearsal mode. And as I scroll down and I get to Killers and Kings, you'll now notice that the green automation, which is showing the next file that we're going to, is skipping over Imperium. Most important, you got to keep the rehearsal button engaged. If you do not have the rehearsal button engaged, you're going to notice that Imperium is going to actually be selected as the next song that we're going into. Here, let me show you what I'm talking about. You see that now Imperium is selected to be the next, but we still see the skip button here. You can go ahead and leave skip engaged for specific songs. I know in my experience, I've done shows with bands where I have automation, but we may not be the headlining band. And if we're running out of time, we do know that there are certain songs that we might have to cut so that way we can finish and get off on time. There's just a few more things that I want to cover here in the automation window. Down here on the bottom left, we see that we have a zoom list. This is going to give us the ability to either zoom in or zoom out on our automation for better viewing. I know some of you old school guys are definitely going to take advantage of this. Next, you see that we have an expand and an unexpand button. Right now, I have the song Killers and Kings recalled in the automation. So let's take a look here on the window once I press the expand button. Once expand, you see now that we can create sub-scenes. This is a great way if you want to go ahead and actually make recall automation for different sections of the song. For example, say in 8.1, we could have that listed as intro, where 8.2 could be our verse, 8.3 could be our chorus, the 4 could be the solo, 5 again back to the chorus, 6 could be our verse again, 7 could be the outro. Or you could just name it however you need it to. The unexpand feature allows us to close this out. Now let's go another step further with the automation. Down in the bottom right-hand corner next to the reorder scenes, we have a show editor button. Let's click on that. Now let me explain the show editor. When we were going over how I'm using the automation, when we were in the soundcheck file, you notice that I had nothing saved out from recall automation. So if you're using the automation differently, where you have all of your recall information happening on every single song, or even specific parts of the song, say you have a channel that you need to make a change to. Let me give you a real-world example for that. Say every night we're using the same microphone on our kick drum. Now, today we come in and find that our kick drum microphone's not working and we don't have a spare. So we asked the house engineer if we could borrow a kick microphone. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the same microphone that we have. So now we have to go in and make our changes to our EQ, our compression settings might be different, as well as even our gains. So the best way for us to go ahead and apply those changes to all of those scenes, or maybe even just specific scenes, this is where we can do that. It's going to save us a big step of having to go through each and every single show file and make the changes individually on a scene-by-scene basis. So let's go ahead and select kick 1. As I said in our example, we have our compressor, our gate, and our EQ have changed. Now on the right side, we have our scene list. This will give us the ability to go through and check each of the scenes that we want to make these changes to. For now, I'm just going to select these 2 songs. Down here on the bottom, you see that we have the ability to select all or none. But for now, I'm just going to stick with these 2. So now we're ready to make the updates. To do that, we click Paste the Scenes, and we'll notice that we have our status at the bottom while it's updating each of the scenes. And just like that, those scenes are done. So that basically covers automation using Recall Scope. I know it might be a little difficult to wrap your head around, but if you have the offline editor, that's a great way for you to set up and become familiar with using the automation.